Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for Mezcal 101. My name is Misty Kalkofen, and I'm here with my friend Elisandro. We're super excited to be here with you today to chat with you about all things Mezcal related, some agave history, some politics, if you will, and all of the things that make Mezcal the wonderful category that it is. So, Elisandro, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Yes. Thank you, Misty. Thank you, everyone. First of all, hello, my name is Elisandro Gonzalez Molina. I'm from Oaxaca, and I work with the brand Mezcal Tosba. And yes, also, I am really excited to be on this seminar and to talk a little bit about what I've been learning and what I know about Mezcal and agaves.
Awesome, thank you. And as I said, my name is Misty Kalkofen. I work with Del Maguey Single Village Mezcal, and I've done so for about 7.5 years. And I'm also happy to work with the TALES committee and the education committee. So I'm really excited that we've been able to put this together in this format and bring you TALES, even though we all can't be together this year. So how about if we get started? Elisandro, do you want to kick us off with a little bit of agave history?
Yeah, let's start with introduction to what agave is. Well, agave it's a plant that it's endemic to the Americas, specifically most of Mexico, to what we know as Mexico, and also some parts of the US, the Southwest. It's been about 11 million years that this plant appeared and on planet Earth. And it goes a little before that, was in 11 million years. Also, for the last 2,500 years in Mexico, on Mesoamerican specifically, people started cultivating agave. So, agricultural practices started to happen since 2,500 years ago. So, my assumption will be that from there's been contact with agave through Mesoamerica. And then also for those years, Mexico or indigenous people of Mexico, Native Americans, have been using it for different purposes, some for food and beverage, some for medicinal, and some for practical uses. This plant particularly, it's very adaptive. It's an amazing plant which adapts very easily to a really harsh environments. And maybe that's one of the reasons why agaves are really easy to adapt to or are more like prevalent to be found in the desert, in really harsh environments. It is also in the 1700s, it was started to be named as the century plant for the longevity of the plant to mature, to grow. So yeah, and the most recent, or the most our purpose of today to use the use of maguey is for mezcal making. So people, the types of agave that there's about 150 to 250 types of agave. A lot of them have not really been classified. Some people there's species and subspecies that are not really classified yet. And the agaves in the shape, they vary in different shapes and forms. Some are bigger, some are smaller, some are sweeter, some are less sweet. So it's really wide, the ecosystem, the types of agave that people, or that we use to make mezcal. Indigenous peoples in Mexico have been using it for many years to make clothes, to make houses, to make food. One of the, for instance, one of the uses, it's like when the plant is about to flower, you could use the flowers, the really tender flowers to make food, and it's really tasty. Once you remove the leaves of the agave, you could cook those agaves and make and get this delicious syrup or this really sweet product that you could eat. And of course, once you make it into distillation, that's how we obtain mezcal. Also, the longevity of the plants are really, it varies. Like some will be as ready to be made into mezcal as quick as 7 years, and some will take up to 25, 30 years to grow. So in as far as Mexico, it's been a cultural item. So people most of the time in most rural, specifically rural Mexico, there is a use for it for throughout the years. You could find sometimes a drink called pulque, and it's a type of ferment that you could use from that you could make from a pulque, from a type of agave called pulquero, where you extract the sap and right away drink it and then if you let that juice to ferment, it will become what we know as pulque, and it has already, after fermentation, it will have some alcohol content. So yeah, so just to summarize what agave is. So yeah, it's been in planet Earth for 11 million years. People have been using it for many purposes, for food, for practical uses, and in our case, to make agave distillates.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's get to the heart of what we're here for, right? Some mezcal. So as Elisandro said, you can find agave throughout Mexico. Not every type of agave can be used to make mezcal for two different reasons. One, in a lot of cases, the agave doesn't have the sugar quantity necessary to actually be fermentable and to then make mezcal. In other cases, because when we're talking about mezcal, that within the denomination of origin, you can only use agave plants that grow within the physical limitations of the denomination of origin. But let's really start by looking at the word mezcal. The word mezcal comes from the Nahuatl language, which is the language of the Aztecs. And it's the combination of two words. It's the word for agave, which is medl, and the word for cooked, which is ixcali. So the combination of those together give us the word mezcal. And so in the oldest sense of the word, mezcal is any distillate that is made from cooked agave. And so I always like to think of the word in two ways. We have mezcal with a small m, which would be any distillate that's made from cooked agave, and then we have the big M mezcal, which comes into play when we start talking about the denomination of origin of mezcal. So officially at this point in time, the word mezcal is owned by the Mexican government. The denomination of origin of mezcal started in 1995. It's grown over time. Right now, it includes municipalities in 9 different states in Mexico. As I said, it's owned by the Mexican government, and the government then gives authority to certain certifying and verifying boards to actually evaluate a product to make sure that it qualifies to be within the denomination of origin. The norma or law that says what mezcal can be is NOM 070. As I said, the denomination of origin started in 1995. The norma that says what mezcal can be is NOM 070. And when the denomination of origin started, they essentially took the norma that says what tequila can be and placed it on the denomination of origin of mezcal. This was problematic in a few different ways, but the biggest one is that the classifications around what mezcal could be were based upon wood aging. Now, there is the existence of some wood aging, and there are classifications in regards to wood aging within the norma still, but the majority of the mezcal that is made and the majority of the mezcal that is exported is not wood aged. And so to have the only classifications in the category being around wood aging did not actually provide a lot of information to the consumer. So recently, in the year 2016, the NOM 070 was reviewed and reorganized, if you will. And now at this point in time, the classifications of the category of mezcal are no longer solely based around wood aging, but they are now based upon process. And so we have three classifications. We have mezcal, mezcal artisanal, and mezcal ancestral. So this slide has a lot of words on it. We're not going to get through everything on it, but as we talk about process, I'll be talking to you about what can be used in the various classifications. For a basic overview, if you start with the category of mezcal, it includes many brands. In a lot of cases, they're the more industrialized brands, but I don't want to say that every mezcal in this category is an industrially produced mezcal. That's not true, because certain brands that have this classification have made certain decisions based upon beliefs around sustainability that have resulted in them being in this category. So I don't want to say that it's just industrially made mezcals. What you'll see is that there's a lot more things that are allowed in the category of mezcal. And as we move into mezcal artisanal and then mezcal ancestral, the methods that can be used are pared down. The norma gets more strict, and the methods that can be used get more traditional and more in sort of the ancient processes, if you will. So as we go along through the rest of the presentation, or specifically when we're talking about production processes, I'll be pointing out the different methods that I'm showing you that can be used in each of these categories. But that's a little brief overview of what the denomination of origin is at this point in time. So let's get into process. So Elisandro, do you want to start us off here and maybe talk a little bit about terroir?
Thanks. Yes. So one of the really amazing things that I like about agave and mezcal, and it's the terroir aspect of it, which is the taste of a place. You have the soil, you have the terrain, you have the climate, you have the tradition. So all these combined, it makes a different outcome every time, each time, like depending of the type of soil. For instance, if you're working with red soil, there is chances that you're gonna have a certain profile aspect of on your final product. That meaning the soil, like where the agave grows. And then if you the terrain part of it, that same agave species or the type of agave that you use on that red soil, but in this case it's in a slope, it also affects the flavor, the final product of your mezcal. Why? Because sometimes, like because of the fact that it's in a slope, and depending on the angle, it will get this amount of sun, and definitely it influences it also. If it's like the soil, it's full of stones also, there is an impact on the final product. And now add to that some climate. The climate, how is it, like really humid? Does it get a lot of precipitation throughout the year? So also that it will affect the rate of how fast your agave will grow, and also will give you a different result and on the final product. And now tradition is how people has been approaching mezcal throughout the years. For instance, there is a lot of mezcal making families that have been making the spirit for many generations. So they have an approach towards the mezcal making, to the mezcal culture, the tradition of making mezcal. Whereas for instance, in our case, we're really first generation where we started experimenting or experiencing all these aspects firsthand, like from the start. Our approach is different. We allow ourselves to give more room to experiment, to do things different, like not as we were told. So that definitely, that's a really important aspect in the whole world of mezcal, there's so many combinations, different factors that will give you a different product. And I was going to mention that for instance, this we made a mezcal duranguensis, a cenizo in the agave. The raw material was brought from Durango, which is about 1,500 miles from Oaxaca. So that plant was grown wild in Durango. My friend brought it to the Palenque, to the distillery in Oaxaca in the mountains. So you have an idea of how Duranguensis, that cenizo, tastes on its own, on its native ecosystem, in its native environment, but being made and brought with the yeasts, with the way that we made it in Oaxaca, the outcome is completely different. So there's an example just to give you what it means to terroir, and all these combinations, all these factors that happen within mezcal, and why mezcal is so beautiful and so complex that in my opinion, there's not like the best mezcal. Is just like the mezcal that you like, but it has so much history, so much combination, so much things added there that it gives like that precise, that nuance that you will get on the flavor. And of course, you will like it. So some other people will like it better than others. So I think that's really the really cool part of mezcal, as far as terroir, as far as the taste of a place, as far as who makes it, and how the agave was grown. And I think that's a really important aspect of mezcal, which is really complex. It's unique. It's not like a straight line where you will find always, and each town will have a different flavor. Each agave will have a different flavor, and moving those around, it's just a different product every time.
I wanted to highlight one of the things that you said, because we so often think of terroir as just like one place, but like that project's super cool because you have these elements of terroir from different locations that are so far removed. And even if you're using agave even just from Oaxaca, depending upon where it's coming from in Oaxaca, it can result in some really significantly different flavors and experiences, because the terrain of Oaxaca is so dramatic, and throughout the entire denomination of origin, not just, Oaxaca. But I think that's something that's super cool and important to highlight about the terroir aspect, and how there's so few spirits that actually exhibit terroir the way that mezcal does, and that's super cool. So let's get down to production. And do you want to start with reproduction and the plant itself for us?
Yeah. So the cycle of making mezcal starts with the raw material, and that is the agave. So sometimes it's either cultivated. It's either through, it's through seeds, through small plants, like little rhizomes that come out of the mother, or bulbs, like the plant would want to reproduce itself, and you will develop little bulbs. So the seeds come from once pollination happened. That means that the plant, the flower was fecundized. So then it will develop the bulb, which once later on, when that bulb dries out, there is going to be seeds inside. If that doesn't happen, the plant itself will force to its reproduction through asexual reproduction. So that means that there's going to be a plant coming out of the flowers, like on the stalk. There's going to be little plants coming out of there. Also, another way that the plant reproduces itself, it's through rhizomes. Those are like extensions that come out of the plant, the mother plant, and it will pop up around the plant when the plant is growing. That way, you remove those plants and you replant them, and it keeps doing the cycle. And those typically called hijuelos as far as Oaxaca lingo. Those are like little babies plants. And so it starts there. And then there is cultivated and semi-cultivated and wild. So the cultivated, you're really focused on making sure that you're getting your seeds and you're making sure that you're reproducing and taking care of your nursery. The semi-cultivated, it's the ones that you put out on the wild and you just forget about them. There is no human interaction. And the wild ones are where the plant is grown and nature does its work. The wind blows away a seed, it lands somewhere, and that's how the plant will grow. Sometimes the results, sometimes like the quality or the richness of a wild plant will be better than the cultivated one sometimes. But I think that's a little subjective. But again, that's kind of like how it starts. So that's kind of like how the agaves start from being small to all the way to up to 7 to, depending on the type of agave, you will have 7 years all the way to 25 years to grow. One sign that the plant is ready to be harvested or is mature is through the flowering. That's kind of like a sign like people typically in the mezcal world will know when to harvest that plant. And that means you remove the flower, the stalk that comes out of the plant, you shave the leaves out of the plant, and then you have this pineapple looking product. So that's kind of where that's how you harvest. So you have the cultivation, the harvesting, which it takes, depending on the type of agave, 7 years to 25 years, and then you remove that from the soil. Then you bring it down to the distillery, and it's where there is an oven that it's ready to cook those. And I think Misty can tell us more what happens after that process of growing agave.
I just, thank you, Elisandro. I wanted to point out one thing. That amazing photo that you provided of the harvest is so cool because two things. One, look at the size of this agaves, right? That's like on the small side with certain varietals, they can be small enough to hold in your hands very easily, like a tobala or something like that. But when we're talking about some of the especially cultivated varietals like espadín, but even also some of the wild varietals like tepestate, you can have piñas that are 200 plus kilograms. So we're talking, I saw one recently that was 415 kilograms in espadín, so we're talking about massive plants. And also the fact that in that photo, it's obvious that they're perfectly mature. They're so ready, because you can see the remains of the quiote. And so that's maguey capon, the flowering stalk has gone up, but they've cut it off so that it's concentrating the sugars in the heart rather than the plant using its energy to reproduce through the flowering stalk. And so all the sugars are concentrated and it's ready to go into this process of making mezcal. So I guess that's where we'll go from now. So once we do have like this great mature agave that we've harvested, and here we saw that great photo of bringing the maguey down with the burros, because so frequently the agave, even if you have a truck, are not located in a place that you can take the truck to. So the harvesting is super labor intensive and takes all hands on deck and all feet on deck, including the burros and the donkeys.
That's a great point. Like, a lot of what happens, as you said, it's labor intensive, and there's a lot that happens behind doors, if we can say that, because sometimes the access to the fields are not the optimal. You can do it either carrying it in the back of your you carrying it in your back or bringing it with the help of donkeys or mules or horses. So it's a whole work that you have to do. And people and their customs, people will do it. It's much easier on flat land than being on a slope. It's much easier if it's, of course, right on where there is a road, whereas if it's like deep in the jungle. So those are like, that's the intense part of mezcal, which it's really intense an intensive
Yeah.
labor.
And every single step, even as we move into production, we'll see that as well. You know, so we've harvested our plants. We have each of the agave at this point in time, the heart is filled with complex carbohydrates, and we need to do something to break those carbohydrate chains down into simpler sugars that are fermentable. And the process for doing so is through cooking. So as I said, as we're moving through production, each of the steps we're going to start with images from the category of mezcal, and then we'll move into what's allowable for artisanal and ancestral. So the first image for cooking, on the left-hand side, you have an autoclave, and this is a technology that you see much more frequently in tequila. You don't see it very often. The autoclave is allowed in the category of mezcal, as is masonry ovens on the right-hand side, and anything else, but autoclaves is something that is only allowed within the category of mezcal, and you really, really don't see either one of these technologies very often in the mezcal space. What mezcal is traditionally known for, and where some of its most prominent flavors and most recognizable flavors come from, is through the more traditional cooking process, which is through the earthen oven. And so the earthen oven is used to build a roast for cooking. And it starts with, in this picture, you see an earthen oven where they're building the fire that's going to propel the roast. Now, this horno is extremely large. It's stone lined. I know that this holds about 13 tons of agave, but hornos and honestly the entire process of building the roast are very, very diverse depending upon where you are at within the denomination of origin, as far as what they will look like, how big they are. You know, in this case, it's stone lined. Frequently, it's just an earthen hole in the ground. They can be all sizes. I've seen them that hold only 2 to 4 tons of agave, up to some that hold 20 plus tons of agave. So they can look very different depending upon where you're at. But the first step is to actually build your fire. And the type of wood that is chosen can definitely affect the flavor of the roast. Some producers are extremely particular about the types of wood that they use and how much of each. Frequently, it's not just one particular type of wood, it's a few different types of wood. Other producers are more intent on being sustainable as far as where they get the wood from, and they'll use whatever comes to them, whether it's coming down a river or what they're able to gather in fields that have fallen on their own, things of that nature. So, but the first step is putting the wood in, and then you're going to start a fire, and that fire will burn down to the point that it's hot coals. The next layer of your roast is going to be stones. And so the stones are either placed on the wood and heated up as the wood is burning down, or they're placed on the hot coals after the hot coals have burnt down, after the wood has burnt down to hot coals. Those stones will be allowed to heat up for several hours, 2 to 5 hours, depending upon where you're at, until they are very, very hot. And it's extremely important that the stones are emanating heat equally so that you're actually getting an even roast on every part. And so it's one of my favorite things to see is the building of a roast, because the steps are very specific and for a lot of the producers. So you'll watch you know, a palancero walk around the stones with his hand held out, feeling the heat emanating off the sides to make sure that they're getting that even heat around. From there, frequently the stones are covered in fibers that have already been gone through the process of making mezcal. So they've been roasted and cooked and distilled and all of those things. And so that will create a layer of insulation between the stones and the agave hearts, the raw agave hearts that will be put on top of those stones. And then from there, once you have all of your harvested agave on and it's starting to look a little bit like a beehive, if you will, you'll insulate more, frequently with more agave fibers that have already been through the process of being roasted, and then maybe canvas mats or tarps, or I know of producers in Michoacan who use fan palms, different layers of insulation. And then finally, it's going to be covered in earth. So as a Boston girl, I always say that it's like a clam bake, but for booze. And so it will be completely covered in earth. And they're very particular to make sure that the amount of earth that's covering, it's covered completely. So you don't want any air leaks because that can result in hot spots or result in the roast going cold, which is not a good thing to happen. And then once covered, the roast is going to stay in the ground minimum of 3 days. I know of one producer that leaves his tobola in the ground for 30 days. It's all dependent upon the tradition of the producer, the time of year, the type of agave, how big the roast is. I think typically we're looking, the majority of the producers use about a 5-day roast, with the first day being the day that the roast is put in the ground and day 5 being the day it's uncovered. But you will see variance in that depending upon the producer and the tradition of the particular producer. I love this picture of the covered roast with the cross on it because you'll frequently see producers blessing the roast in some sort of way as an acknowledgement, a recognition that what happens now is kind of outside of our control. So it's kind of an appeasement to the gods that everything goes right from here on out, now that we're not in charge anymore. Frequently, the producer halfway through the roast will uncover a little bit, see how things are going, perhaps charge the stones with some more water to get some steam going in there. But after the roast is completed and it's uncovered, which it's like my favorite day in the world is the day that the roast is uncovered, because as they take all of the layers off and unearth it, start pulling out the roasted agave, you can smell it just all around the house and all around the palenque, and it's just amazing. You definitely want to be downwind that day. So they take all of the agave out, and now we have these beautiful roasted hearts, and we have sugars that are available to actually be fermented. Usually the hearts will rest for a few days, and frequently as they're resting, and actually depending upon the type of agave, sometimes they'll intentionally rest them for longer because fermentation will start to on the agave as they're sitting and resting, which can be helpful for some of the agaves with lower sugar quantities that are more challenging to mill, which is our next step. So in this first picture of milling, it almost pains me a little bit to include this, but we're doing a categorical study, right? We have an image of a diffuser, which a diffuser, one of the good things about the category of mezcal is that even though we are using diffusers, which to be completely honest, if I had my way, we would not be seeing this technology as a part of mezcal ever at any point in time. But they have put some structures around how this particular machine can be used. The diffuser is a technology that originated in the production of sugar. And it's when used fully, it's used to extract as much sugar from fibers as possible. It was retrofitted to be used in agave in tequila in the 90s when there was a severe agave shortage. And one of the changes that they made was that they added this chemical component to it that would allow the raw agave to be cooked through a chemical process. That is not allowed in the mezcal denomination of origin. So the norma for mezcal says that you can use a diffuser for milling purposes, but you cannot use it. You have to use agave that has already been cooked. So there are some guardrails around the use of this particular technology. Once again, this is very much for larger industrial producers. The machine costs a lot of money, so you don't see it very often in the world of mezcal, and I hope it stays that way. So a diffuser can only be used within the basic category of mezcal. You can also, allowable for milling also are mechanical mills. The image that I have here is actually for tequila. The mechanical mills that we see most frequently in Oaxaca are actually gas-powered wood chippers. And unfortunately, I didn't have a picture of one, and I couldn't find one, but if you do see a mechanical mill, that's usually the mill that you see. They were provided through the Mexican government through kind of an aid package, if you will, at one point in time. Unfortunately, because they are for wood, for use for wood chipping, they don't work well with agave because there's a lot of sugar in agave, and so they frequently break. And they break frequently. They get gummed up. Also, one of my issues with these gas-powered wood chippers or degazadoras are that they are gas-powered, and so when you're working with open-air fermentation, for me, there's an issue around what might end up in the fermentation if you're using a gas-powered machine next to it. So we can use mechanical mills and artisanal mezcal, including the wood chippers. But more frequently, what you see are some of the more traditional methods, such as the horse-drawn molino. In the world of tequila, this would be known as a Tahona. It's a drag mill that traditionally uses a technology for processing mineral ores that then was started to be used in the haciendas of tequila and the haciendas in Jalisco. So essentially, it's a large mill with a stone. It can be either a cement stone or a round piece that's been cut out of one large piece of stone, or sometimes a bunch of small stones that are put together. No matter what it is made out of or fabricated from, traditionally it is horse-drawn or drawn by mules or oxen. And so that is a very common milling technique. But then if we want to go back even further, we can go to the hand milling, which is done either by large bat or by wooden mallets, and either stone troughs or in hollowed out tree trunks called canoas. And so this is typically associated with producers that are using more ancestral methods for making their mezcal. So once we've milled and we have all of our fibers, all of our juices, we're ready to go into the fermentation step. As far as fermentation is concerned, it can be done with or without fibers. Most traditional producers are using fibers. For me, a huge aspect of terroir comes into play here, because most traditional producers are not inoculating their fermentation in any way. So they're not adding yeasts or anything of that nature. All of the fermentation is being started through whatever microbes and yeasts are available in the ambient, in the air around them and around the palenque. And so after everything has been milled, it's placed in the fermentation container, frequently wooden tinas or vats, but you can also use animal hides that have been stretched into essentially large bowls. You could use stone containers that have been cut out of the earth. Some people use rotoplas. In the case of the more industrial sector, you can use stainless steel. But all fibers and juices are placed into the ferment. It's allowed to rest for about 24 hours as the microbes are starting to work on the sugars, and then water is added. So once it's formulated and the water is added, you really start to see the evidence of fermentation, of those microbes eating the sugars, expelling alcohol and carbon dioxide. And so you'll see on the left-hand side in this slide, we have just the beginning of fermentation, the bubbles just starting to come about. And then on the right, you see a ferment that's probably been in for several days. As fermentation has been taking place, those fibers have started moving to the top, and they'll be pushed down throughout the process, moved around to expose all of the sugars. And so fermentation can take anywhere from 3 days in really warm environments to up to 3 weeks in the case of one of the producers I work with. But once we get to the end of fermentation, all of the sugars have been converted into alcohol, and we have a tepache, a ferment that's usually around 5% alcohol, depending, sometimes a little bit lower, sometimes a little bit higher, depending upon the type of agave that you've been using, because all agaves have different levels of sugar quantity in them. Also, how ripe and mature the agave was. The more mature it is, the more the sugars will have concentrated. Okay, so once we've finished fermentation, we're ready to go into distillation. This first slide, the title slide here, that's not a common sight in the world of Mezcal, but when you are talking about the first category within the NOM, the category of Mezcal, you can use any type of still. So if you wanted to use a column still or these stainless pot stills, you could use anything. There's no holds barred when it comes to that category. What you see more traditionally in the majority of the mezcals that are coming out of Mexico are much more traditional styles of stills. So in the first slide, we have a copper pot still on the left-hand side. These are much smaller than you would expect to see in other categories. Traditionally, the copper pot stills that are being used in the category of mezcal are anywhere between 250 and 350 liters. So very small still. Clay stills. Clay stills are part of the ancestral category. In addition to being clay, needing to be clay with either a clay or wooden condenser on top, it needs to be a direct fire still. So those are the two stipulations in regards to the category of ancestral. In the following slide, we have two versions of what would be considered a hybrid still. The hybrid stills on the left, in the bottom, inside the adobe that you can't really see, would be a stainless steel pot, and that's a clay condenser on the top. And then on the right-hand side, these are stills from Emilio Vieira in Michoacan, and that's would be a copper pot on the bottom with a wooden condenser on the top. So these are just some of the stills that are that you would see if you were to travel throughout the denomination of origin of mezcal. You know, there are as many technologies for distilling within the DEO as there are styles of building the roast. I always like to say, as far as the category of mezcal is concerned, there's no absolutes. You learn something new every time you meet a new producer as far as the style and production practices. And so that's what makes it one of the most diverse categories in the world, and also one of the most exciting categories in the world. And for me, makes it possible for me to continue to learn and grow even after 7 to 10 years of studying the category. So with each of these stills, you get different textures and different experiences. For example, with a clay still, you get a very rich mouthfeel traditionally. The clay itself is porous to a certain degree, so you'll actually get elements of that earthen still in the mezcal. So it's cool once you have tried several of those, you can start to pick those out and when you're tasting blinds and everything. So each still provides different elements into the flavor profile and the experience of the mezcal that it produces. So as far as our end product, traditionally mezcal is bottled at 45 to 55% alcohol. The Norma does allow for alcohol content to be lower than that, and you will see that on some of the more industrially produced mezcals, but typically we're looking at 45 to 55% alcohol for bottling proof. Traditionally, the producers would test the alcohol proof by looking at the pearls, or las perlas, which you see here in the jicaro or the gourd. It's the bubbles or the pearls will tell a producer what the proof of the alcohol, the bubbles or the pearls will tell the producer the proof of the mezcal. And it's all based around surface tension between water and alcohol. So as you move closer to that 50% alcohol, the bubbles become larger as the water and the alcohol are trying to stay away from one another. So that is the basics of how we make mezcal. It's a crazy category, so of course we could go into another 2 or 3 hours just talking about production process, but that's kind of the basics there. But once we have our mezcal, how do we drink it? I guess is the next question. So traditionally, mezcal is served neat, and you sip it, and usually you sip it with reverence. You know, it's used a lot in for rituals and for occasions of celebration and to mark special occasions and things of that nature. You know, when you do 101 seminar, you're asked to talk about the iconic drinks made with your spirit, and for mezcal there really isn't one. The iconic spirit is the iconic drink of mezcal. You would see traditionally a lot of curados, or what we might call infusions. Frequently, if you go into markets in Oaxaca, you'll see people drinking a little bit of an infusion of mezcal with herbs. That's more of a medicinal. You might have a little bit in the morning for your constitution. Frequently, you'll see mezcals that are infused with fruit. It's a very common gift. If you've been asked to be a madrina or a padrino for an event, they'll grow fruit inside a bottle and then fill the bottle with mezcal and present it as a gift if you've contributed to the fiesta in some sort of way. But the category has grown immensely in the last 20 years, 25 years, and the growth has really been driven by bartenders, and that growth has been driven by bartenders in a couple different ways. One is that bartenders, like many of you, are very interested in history and culture around the products that they serve. And so there's no lack of history or culture when you're talking about mezcal. Also, as a category, it's one of the most diverse categories. So depending upon the mezcal you're drinking, you could have a flavor profile that might be earthy and smoky, like an Islay single malt scotch, or you might have something that's floral and citrusy, like a well-made gin. And so these complex flavors and diverse flavors provide so many opportunities for great cocktails. I think we are all familiar with mezcal being substituted into some great classics. So if you have that, a mezcal that's reminiscent of a smoky scotch, or might share some flavor profile with a bourbon, that earthiness of a bourbon, you can try it in your Oaxacan Old Fashioned. Or if one of my favorite classic cocktails is the Puritan. It's like if a gin martini in Alaska had a baby. So if you take a beautiful citrusy floral mezcal and place it with some dry vermouth and a little bit of yellow chartreuse, you have a wonderful version of that. As far as starting your journey on mixing with cocktails, my best piece of advice is that of what grows together goes together. So really looking at Oaxacan cuisine and the flavors that one really associates with Oaxaca, and use those to influence or support your ideas around cocktails. So think about tropical fruits, think about coffee, think about chocolate, think about herbs like olla santa, things of that nature. And it's really, there's a lot of opportunities. So don't be afraid to play around with it, and see where the journey takes you a little bit. So we've looked at kind of the past, we've looked at some of the present with as far as like the NOM 070 and what has happened in regards to that in the last revision of the laws in regards to mezcal. Elisandro, what do you think about the future? What do you think about right now? Because you spend so much time in Oaxaca, and you're there with Edgar right now, and you've been weeding and all of these things. Like, what is the state of the mezcal category right now, and what do you think about the future? Like, where is it going? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, well, as you have mentioned before, for the last 10 years, mezcal has grown exponentially. of course, people have been working for more than 10 years on pushing and presenting mezcal to the world. And definitely it has had a positive impact in the economic side of things, especially here in Oaxaca, which I could see firsthand. Definitely, it's been a vehicle to economic development. People are getting involved into mezcal production. People are getting interested in growing more agave. So definitely that has given opportunity not only for Oaxacans, but also in other parts of the country of Mexico. And also with that said, there is also a new newcomers that have been uh, coming into that wave of trying to participate in the complexity of mezcal, which we started to see destilados de agave, which I mean there is a legal issue there as far as what is mezcal and what is not, and at the end it all comes from the agave plant. With that being said, yeah, the future looks great, promising for a lot of people involved in the mezcal world. Uh, Myself personally, since I grew up in Oaxaca, this is an opportunity, and that's how we took it as with Mezcal Tosba as an opportunity to develop and to create an economy to mitigate migration, for instance. That's something that we could take into consideration and a practical aspect of it. A lot of migrants are from Oaxaca, but also a lot of migrants are coming back to Oaxaca because of mezcal. A lot of people within these villages or these communities are staying in the village and just seeing like, you know what, I'm just gonna do mezcal because that's what I want to do. With that, also it comes some not so pleasant issues like deforestation, like the use of the waste, which then also brings us as consumers, as advocates of mezcal, that we could bring that conversation to the table. Yes, mezcal is delicious, brings along some problematic issues. So then that's kind of like where we need to focus. And that's what we're doing, and how to use the waste of what happens when you distill, how to use, how to implement reforestation campaigns and practices so that this can grow and keep growing sustainably. So definitely, I see a really positive aspect in the future for mezcal. I'm really excited that people has taken the time to recognize, because the spirit has been here for many years, and ultimately the guardians of this beautiful spirit, it's been the mezcaleros, which also we need to take into like give them the place and talk about them, because ultimately they're the ones who've been maintaining and surviving what it is to make mezcal. With that, of course, it's as you said, the economic side of it before was more challenging than what it is. It looks more promising. So if we keep consuming mezcal and we keep growing the category in a responsible way, definitely there is a great future for mezcal, and not only for the ones that make it, but also for the ones who enjoy it, who consume it. And yeah, this is the ultimate spirit, because it's so beautiful, it's so complex. Of course, it's really labor intensive, as we said before, because the amount of time that takes to grow one plant, it's 7 years. So the cycles are super long, that sometimes you get lost in that, in the length of that cycle. So we need to start thinking of mezcal in the really long term and see what is happening. And yeah, and look out for those brands or those products or those people that are doing or are trying to do things on in the right way, because on edible or not avoidable, there is uh, ecological, there is like casualties along the way with what, but let's try to make that as best as we can, because I mean, it's been here and it's for us to enjoy and to keep enjoying mezcal. And the future, yeah, that it's a really positive. That's the way I see it as a Oaxacan, as somebody that just went back to mezcal because it was forgotten in my region. it's the future it's great, and let's share it with my fellow bartenders, with the people in the industry, the people that are interested, are curious about what mezcal is. It's been here, not only in Oaxaca, but in the entire country, and it looks like it's going other countries too. That because it's a really cool plant. What do you think,
Yeah.
Misty?
I love that you said growing the category responsibly, because I think that's the key to the continued success of the category. That there's responsibility on both sides of the equation. There's the responsibility of those of us who are those who are making it to maintain the traditions that have been in place to protect the environment, to protect the family, to protect the category, to protect the culture. I also think there's a responsibility for those of us who promote the category to make sure that people are educated and can make good decisions around purchasing. And then there's a huge responsibility on those who are purchasing as well to educate themselves and to make sure that they are making purchasing decisions that are good for the category, i.e. brands that are making good decisions that are for the category. So I think there's no other category in the spirits industry where it's as important to be educated about where a product is coming from, who's making it, and the practices that they have. And so I think that's, research around this category is extremely important. The good thing is bartenders like to be nerds a lot of the time, like me. So we've provided some information for you all on how to do some further research. The mezcalistas are friends who have an amazing website. They are not associated with a particular brand. They are educators about the category. They are promoters of the category, and they are really great at providing well-researched articles about the issues that are most important right now. They also do some really great events where you can get some firsthand knowledge and tasting opportunities. There's some really great podcasts out there, including Maestros de Mezcal, Jeje Agave, The Agave Road Trip, Elixir of the Gods, and Gringo in Latin America. And then there's also some really great books out there. So we have information available for everybody. I've put together a deck with images and more information than we could provide in this 60 minutes for you, including a list of resources for you for further research. So you'll be able to access that through the Tails Google Drive. So please check that out and keep learning about mezcal and enjoying mezcal, because there's nothing quite like it in the world, right? But Elisandro, I think our time is up here for today. Thank you so much for joining me and coming down from the Palenque to Oaxaca City so that we could have internet.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. And drink more mezcal.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you, Misty, for the invitation. I hope we did a great job. We try to put as much as I can there, but more than happy. If you guys have any questions, please reach out to Elisandro or through Tales of the Cocktails. And again, thanks to Tales for the invitation, and I'm more than happy to share what I know and what I'm learning. And again, yeah, thank you.